Good morning, world. I'm sorry for the lighting. This is Steve Rao. I'm at an office where the lighting is dim, but this is Steve Rao, the host of Pod TV's World Edition on the Roku TV channel. And we welcome you from around the world to our wonderful show where we talk about global affairs, innovation, and what we might be looking at a new phase of the pandemic, which isn't over, but things looking a lot more normal where I sit, greeting you live from North Carolina, the eighth largest state in the Union. Today I'm in Cary, a suburb of Morrisville. And yes, Nick, I know that people in Ukraine do not know, or Lithuania, where Morrisville is, but we are in North Carolina, the eighth largest state in the Union. Today I want to give you my State of the War update as we continue our discussion on Russia, Ukraine, and other matters. President Vladimir Zelensky addressed British Parliament, echoing Winston Churchill's famous remarks from World War II. We will fight in the forests, we will fight in the fields, on the shores, and in the streets. A passionate, emotional plea from the president of this democracy of 40 million people. President Biden has banned imports of Russian oil and gas and coal and warned that sanctions would raise gas prices, and we're already seeing that effect here in the United States. And McDonald's and Starbucks have closed all their outlets in Russia, and Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and Heineken have halted sales. While all of this is going on, I must be honest as I close out this monologue. Russian force are pushing over to take key pieces of infrastructure, including the airport in Mykolaiv, and Putin has made it clear, our intelligence shows in the United States, that he will continue to attack civilians, that there's no amount of deaths of innocent mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters and even children, that he will wage this war no matter what the cost of life is. I got very emotional last night before I went to bed. I delivered an invocation at a town hall meeting on Ukraine. And I quoted John F. Kennedy, who said at American University that the kind of peace we need is a peace not only for our time, but a peace for all time. And yet we see the atrocities in Ukraine. On a point of personal privilege, I do want to say that I agree with Sasha Starr that we cannot condone the actions of this maniacal dictator who is taking innocent lives every day as we speak. I want to challenge our panel today before we get our show of where do we do and how do we react to this guy? Did the United States and the world allies stop when Hitler did the atrocities during the Holocaust? I know attacking the nuclear power isn't what we need to be doing, but it made me very angry last night. I really believe the world would be safer without Vladimir Putin in it. Plain and simple. He is ruthless. He is a dictator. He is out to kill. He's out to kill with no regard for the sanctity of human life. As far as I'm concerned, the United States of America, if we do not accept bin Laden, if we did not accept Saddam Hussein, then how can we as the leader of the free world accept this dictator? As President George Bush called it, the axis of evil. Not all Russians, of course, but the person who is the face of Russia. We'll talk about that today. And where do we go from here? Today, we have with us Mark Lee, my co-producer, radio celebrity on the Roku TV network, Nick Paladiva, our founder of IBM TV, and Chris Greco, retired Lieutenant Colonel, United States Air Force, who provides military and policy analysis on this show, and Sasha Starr. Welcome, Sasha, to the show. I wanted to make those comments today because I know it got a little heated yesterday, but I do agree with Sasha Starr that no loss of life can be justified, and perhaps our guest was misinterpreting or misinforming. I don't think he was trying to do it, but I think it's important for us to send that message. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Sasha first about what I said, where we go from here, because I got to be honest with you, Sasha, I'm getting scared. Because when I see innocent children dying in the streets, and our CIA and our intelligence in the United States, what we're getting to the president, is saying that no amount of civilian casualties will stop this guy, and it continues, I really wonder what we're doing. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Okay. Right now, we can possibly see where it all goes from now on, simply because the Russian war machine gets stuck with the fierce defense of Ukrainian people. And it's Zelensky, president of Ukraine, is a great statesman, and I think he will be a person of the year. He'll probably get a Nobel Prize. But that's not an issue right now. Right now is issue for Ukraine to hold for another uh, maybe 10 days would be ideal because that would be enough time for them to regroup, get more help from the West, get more mercenaries, which now number about 20,000. If it will get up to 50,000, Ukraine will have probably the strongest army in Europe, including Russia. They will just defeat Russia, just very simple. Doesn't matter about their great power and the tanks and planes or so on. In combat, Stalingrad style, Ukrainian definitely will prevail. That's quite obvious. Now, I was doing some more thinking about um, origins of the conflict. I remember I was telling in one of my programs that Putin was under heavy influence of philosopher Alexander Dugin, and basically his goal was to make a strong nationalistic Russia. And remember, Putin, even before he got under Dugin influence, he was saying, I think in Munich 2007, that the dissolution of Soviet Union was the biggest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. If he is correct in his thinking about that, then to resurrect new Soviet Union is definitely goal of his life. And because he's approaching 70, then when is he going to do that, if ever? So any union, Soviet Union or any other union without Ukraine doesn't make any sense. It's nothing. So Ukraine is goal number one. What makes it so tough? First of all, in 1991, Soviet Union was dissolved. Ukraine was the first republic to leave Soviet Union. Then, a few days later, they had this famous meeting in Belarus. Yeltsin, president of Ukraine at that time, was Kravchuk, and president of Belarus was Shushkevich. And they've arranged, because all the three Slavic republics, they've arranged and made a statement that Soviet Union as a geopolitical entity is no longer exist.
Right.
So Ukraine was right at the top countries that actually made it. Very interesting enough that Gorbachev actually, before Yeltsin went to that meeting, Gorbachev asked him, uh, please do me a favor, ask Kravchuk, then president of Ukraine, are there any conditions at all that Ukraine would agree to join that new union, which they were still trying to save it, new conditions and so on. And Yeltsin approached Kravchuk and asked him exactly that. You know what Kravchuk replied? It will bring us to today, Zelensky. Kravchuk replied that, look, I'm a president of the country, and I had a mandate. I don't remember the number, but somewhere over 80% Ukrainians, there was a referendum, and 80% or more Ukrainians voted to leave the Soviet Union. So before I will do what you are asking me to do, I have to resign as the president of the country. I have to tell my people that I no longer can fulfill my duty as a president because I want to do something different than what you voted for, here is my resignation.
Yes.
From that
Hey,
point on, there was no other outcome possible. So now, exactly, here is what happened. Zelensky's approval rating now is 90%. In the constitution of Ukraine,
Right.
is Ukraine is aspiring to become member of NATO and European Union. So a lot of people are saying, "Oh, Zelensky, okay, just give up. Say Russians, okay, fine, okay, you're good, you're our friends, or so on. Let's work out some peaceful
Yes. I
solution."
mean, this
But he
is
cannot do that because he has to go against the constitution. So he has to resign first, get somebody else, and somebody else would change
well,
constitution.
this is
I don't know.
very shocking, and I think that it's just unfortunate that we're in this situation.
yeah,
Sasha, we thank you, and we know this is a tough situation for you, very emotional. We're praying for Ukraine. Before I go to you, Mark,
yeah.
Mark, go ahead, but I wanted to get Chris's military announcement. Mark, you go first, and then
No, I
I
was
want
going to just add, and this is actually geared to what I'm going to frame it as also a question for Chris. But I did see that over the weekend, our former president has had some very interesting quotes and everything. Because apparently, at a speech to Republican donors, he had said that the U.S. should actually put Chinese flags on F-22 jets, and as he could quote unquote said, bomb the shit out of Russia in retribution for its invasion of the Ukraine. And actually, the Washington Post and others had reported those remarks. And then he said that if we did that, then we could say that China did it, we didn't do it, and then we could start watching them fight each other and sit back and watch. So that was his idea of a
what was
strategy and everything. But the other thing that he mentioned, and this is where I wanted to ask Chris, is that he called NATO a paper tiger. Said that the U.S. military had won skirmishes against Russian troops while he was president, and he claims that he was tougher than Vladimir Putin than any of our past U.S. leaders. But I was just wondering what your thoughts were of NATO as a actual force that can be used in this kind of situation as one that is coming from the military background. Because I've heard other people say also that they don't feel that NATO has any teeth on it. I hadn't heard that phrase by him, meaning Trump of paper tiger, but I have heard the phrase paper tiger before. But I'm just wondering what your thoughts are of the teeth that NATO have in attacking this situation.
Okay, so the last time, and I don't know if I can really speak to current aspects, but the last time that I was entrenched with NATO and actually did things with NATO was during the Bosnian crisis, and I can tell you that the U.S. basically shored up, and those people that are from Europe that are listening to this show, they're going to sit back and they're going to go, no, 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 and I'm going to say yes, yes, yes. We paid, and are now paying 75% of NATO's budget. 75%. So whatever they have in the way of, and Germany now, and that's what President Trump was trying to say. He wasn't trying to get us out of NATO. He was trying to say, hey, your fair share. You're taking all your money and you're putting it into manufacturing and commerce and all those things. And all of a sudden, it's like, we're paying 75%. Horse poop on this. We're going to start putting our money back and pay our fair share, and you pay your fair share. But I've dealt with Germans. I've dealt with Italians. I've dealt with Norwegians. I've dealt with Netherlanders. I've dealt with all the different NATO countries. Man, I'll tell you, the Netherlands, they have a nice, very, very nice military. Let me tell you something. If they're deployed anywhere outside of Netherlands at that time, now that was 30 years ago, it may have changed now, but if they were deployed more than a certain period of time, like 3 months or whatever it is, they had 2 weeks paid vacation, paid to go back to their country, Netherlands, or Netherlands would pay to have their partner, spouse, significant other to come over to the deployed location. Or if they decided, I don't want any of that, they would pay them the money that they would have paid them to do those 2 weeks. So there was a lot of things I was hearing. Turkey was the only one in NATO that just has had a military that was just really, really backward from the standpoint. If they found somebody sleeping in a ditch during their guard post, that they shot him, literally shot him in the head. They executed him right there, right then. So it was and I heard that from a Turkish military person, not from secondhand. So it was was a very, very enlightening time for me to see all these different countries come into play. And I've been in exercises with NATO where they were air defense exercises where they just basically said they just wouldn't worry about it because it was an exercise. They didn't take things very seriously. Again, Europe is going to, if they have comments, they're going to sit there and say, Chris, you're way out of line. This isn't happening now. Hey, again, it was 30 years ago. So things could have changed back by then. I don't know about that, but U.S. will be the foundation by which all NATO gets into lockstep.
Now, let me ask you this question. I'm sorry. I'm going to go to Chris and Sasha and Mark. So, and I'm sorry if I missed the earlier part of your remarks, but I was thinking about this last night. What would it be maniacal for us to send in planes and direct forces, and obviously we have the failed war in Afghanistan and Iraq, but something other than economic sanctions to show Putin that we're willing to fight and die ourselves to stop this nonsense? Or would that put us in the verge of nuclear war?
UN resolution. You need a UN resolution to say, we're not going to put up with this. Get your troops out. You have this time to get your troops out. Put NATO and U.S. troops along the border and say, this is what's going to happen.
Would that lead to World War III, though?
Not a UN resolution. I mean,
if we send tanks and troops into Ukraine and we start fighting and killing Russians, would that be World War II? And would he launch the nuclear missiles towards the United States?
No, everyone's saying he's going to launch. It's not
even 50-50. How do we know he wouldn't do that?
I'll tell you why. It's because if he, and this is a big if, but if, and I shouldn't even say if, he is going back to the old Soviet area, which means that there are districts, there are areas, nobody's going to do anything, nothing, unless the person above them says to do something. And Sasha, you were in the Soviet military, you were in military districts. If your military district commander said, no, we're not going to do that, then you didn't do it. They took, and because they got it from person above that, from person above that, from person above that. And if he says fire the missiles, it takes everybody below that person to say yes, 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 all the way down to the ground missile to say yes, we're going to fire that.
But
and they're not going to do that.
The other thing I was wondering about, though, and I actually went out to grab a bite to eat yesterday, and I was talking to the manager of the place, and he actually brought this up as well. And I'm now seeing an article that's bringing up the same question, which is, before we get involved, are we not going to do what some people would call proxy fighting, meaning that we'll supply the weapons, but it's not necessarily our people that are going into the battle? And there's been a whole conversation even around Poland and how we are supplying them with MiG-29s, and I think there's some other countries that we're supplying as well. But it's like we're supplying them our weapons. I guess if they're shot down, then from the Russian standpoint, they may think that it was U.S. Soldiers or U.S. weapons. But it's almost like we're providing proxy equipment and then there's a whole conversation around that as to whether that is a good thing or not. And that's even been out in the public conversation spaces that are out there as well. So the places of public discord. So I'm just wondering, what are our thoughts? I guess this is back to both Chris and Sasha about these weapons that we are providing to both the Ukrainian people as well as to some of the countries that are on the border, such as Poland and some of the other ones that are out there as well.
There's go ahead, Sasha.
I would like to address that, but also ask you a question. Give me just a few seconds. Number one is, so U.S. is hiding by the doctrine that it's supplying only defensive systems. And obviously the Russian 30 years or so old MiG fighters, they are not defensive, but rather offensive. And that's why U.S. doesn't want to get involved in that. And Poland did very tricky and very smart move. And they say, yes, we are supplying 500 MiGs, but first they will go to Ramstein, the U.S. base in Germany. And from there, they would go to Ukraine. Very clever, very nice. And U.S. had to... unfortunately, they had to decline that, and maybe rightly so, although you know that I'm not supporting that. But let me ask you this. Turkey, which is a member of NATO, is supplying directly to Ukraine systems so-called Bayraktar. I think they are drones, very powerful drones that can shoot and already killed, destroyed several helicopters, Russian helicopters and Russian troops on the ground. So how Turkey, a NATO member, is not scared to supply directly to Ukraine a very powerful new devices, and US is scared to supply 500 old 30 years old Soviet
Well,
fighters.
Turkey has always been kind of a yes, they're part of NATO, but you got to remember also Greece is part of NATO, and Turkey is never like Greece ever. Even when they were doing joint exercises, they would have a U.S. person in between the Turkish and the Greek, because the Turkish would say. To the U.S. person. Now they were sitting right next to each other, but the U.S. person was in there. The Turkish would say to the U.S. person, "Tell that pig Greek that we're going to lunch at whatever. Would he like to join us?" And the U.S. person would turn to the Greek and say, "Hey, would you like to go to lunch?" And the Greek would say, "Tell that Turkish jerk that blah 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 blah." And the U.S. would say, "Yes, yes, we'd like to go to lunch." Seriously, this is what they did in NATO Southern Region headquarters.
But
So
Chris,
Turkey was always kind of out there, and they have a lot of different. Well, first of all, they have a very very high Muslim population. So that they think of Ukraine. Ukraine does have a Muslim population, so they are supporting that.
Number. Ukraine has very small number of Muslim population.
Even if it's 1%, they're going.
It used to when Crimea was part of Ukraine, then it would have significant
the Tatars,
population and very well established, but it's all gone by now in 2014. So right now there's basically a neglected number of Muslims there. So Turkey is not helping because of the Muslim factor. No, Turkey has its own policies, and although they're a member of NATO, and somehow Turkey is not scared that Russia would attack them. You know why? Because they will beat the hell out of them.
Ottoman Empire, yeah.
Turkey,
I mean,
they will be merciless. Turkey will not even take. Remember Turkey shoot just a few years ago the Russian air warplane in Syria, or a border between Syria and Turkey, and Russia had to just swallow that. That's it. They were not willing to do anything substantial against Turkey. It's a member of NATO after all, and Russia just doesn't have enough power to deal in Syria and Turkey all at the same time, and there's Ukraine has not been resolved one way or another. So this is why Russia now has the active army forces of Russia is about 200,000 people. They all already employed in Ukraine. And as we speak, the numbers are getting smaller and smaller. There are already probably close to 4,000 were verified, were killed. 4,000 for sure. Now the real numbers could be as high as 10,000, maybe even more.
Yeah.
So now Russia is becoming mainland. Russia is becoming very vulnerable. Let's see where it will go from there.
But I mean, do you think? So. Let me ask you this: do you think that the longer this dries out, that it's going to be like Putin's Afghanistan, Sasha?
It's going to be much worse than that. It's not going to last 10 years like Afghanistan. Come on. Besides getting all the needed weapons, actually Patriot systems are now already approved for Ukraine. Now, I remember one thing. I said many times, how many thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, if you will, of people in Europe, in the United States, in Canada, and many other countries who just wait for opportunity to fight with the Russians and kill them. There are so many people. There are already 20,000 veterans, army veterans from US, Canada, Germany, UK, Poland. There's just too many countries to list. They are already on the ground They are well armed. They are very experienced fighter. One fighter out of those 20,000 is worth 10 Russian
Yes, that's. I mean, but
conscripts.
if it doesn't go as long as Afghanistan, and let's say he's not able to get these cities, I'll go to Chris. Do you think this will weaken Russia? That they'll walk away weaker? These sanctions, are they going to work, or will they just repress? I mean, how much does he have to lose here, Putin, in terms of his standing in the world, his economy?
Well, I think the point made by Sasha, which I agree with, if Putin was a reasonable man, he's not a reasonable man, which means that at this point, and it's interesting, we are such. And there was Admiral McConnell, who was the director of NSA, said one time when he was a one-star admiral that we have a crisis du jour. We have a crisis du jour in the United States. We do the crisis du jour. And what's happening is we're not looking like a chess player. A chess player never watches the board and sees just the current situation. He or she takes a look at the board and sees the possibilities of moves within that chessboard. Now, I'm a very amateur chess player, so I don't even know. I mean, I don't know any of those, Queen's Gambit, King's Gambit, all the other horse poop gambits. I don't know that. But the bottom line is when I was taught to play chess by my father, I was basically stop looking at the current situation only. Look at those moves that can be made. We are not paying attention to China. And I am telling you, that China is putting that next move into play as we speak.
Yes, and that's
and we're sitting back.
That's a great segue. That's a great segue to our next talk, right? And I love the way this show is going. We're going to talk about the economic sanctions in a minute, but let's talk about China, right? Because think about it. Before this crisis, China was the elephant in the room. We've had David M. Walker on the show, former Comptroller General of the United States, the rising superpower. Then Trump comes in. He says, we're going to take on China. We're going to put in sanctions. We're going to put in tariffs. Even President Biden, his successor, is saying, we're going to buy American. He said that in the State of the Union, right? We're going to take out. COVID comes along, disrupts their supply chain, right? They have the Olympics, and now you've got the war in Ukraine, right? And now what's happened is there are two things that are happening, and I want to get y'all's opinion. The first thing is that it seems like the more and more we fight Russia, our policies are pushing China and Russia closer together. So when you see Putin and the premier of China sitting together, at the Olympics with the memo that they did saying that we're allies, we're going to be working together. Russia selling them gas and oil, China selling them technology, right? But now what's happened is the awaken the sleeping giant, Europe, NATO, right? Everybody's like on alert. So my second question and observation, and then I'm going to let you guys talk about it, is this alienating China now from the world? Like, in other words, is it making all of these other countries now saying, we're against China too? Pam, what is your take on that?
They can't. The sanctions that are being put into play in Russia right now, if every country in the world, 193 or whatever it is of them, would just sit there and say, we are totally isolating Russia. We are not going to trade with them at all. Anything, they're going to be under siege. Have fun in Ukraine because you're not going to be eating much anymore. If every country were to do that, but they're not doing that, the U.S. is, we're going to do this and do that, and we're going to stop the oil thing, and we're going to do this, and Europe is saying blah, blah, blah. China is sitting there going, cool. You know what we're going to do? We're going to trade with you guys. And I'll tell you what, as we trade with you, we're going to ask you guys for some things like on the Kamchatka Peninsula. I wonder if you guys could provide us some support on this situation with South China Sea and the islands, and maybe help us with Taiwan a little bit. Maybe put them under a squeeze play. I mean, like I said, Seventh Fleet. Something has to happen here where we sit back and we go, yeah, we got Ukraine, and because we're totally focused on Ukraine, not saying we shouldn't help them, but we have got to get. Everyone's talking about Putin, like we got to figure out what Putin's mindset is. What mindset? The guy's out there, man. He's just like, hey, I'm going to take Ukraine, and if nobody stands in my way, I'm going to take Moldova next. I'm Belarus, and we're just going to just keep on sweeping west through Europe. Screw you all. And in the meantime, you got China.
Chris, isn't part of the problem with China, and I don't know that everybody's going to agree with me, but isn't part of the problem with China? It comes to something that Sasha's talked about before, which is this whole definition of Marxism and communism. Because if we listen to our media and if we listen to even people in the streets and everything, they will try to frame the conversation in both China and in to some degree Russia as this communism versus capitalist argument and everything, when the truth of the matter is that there is, in my mind, very few countries, if any, that actually practice any of those principles 100%, including the principles of capitalism. But if we're going to look at that, China definitely has a lot of Western businesses, and there's a lot of Western influences that are influence a lot of what we do, including what our children do. I mean, what's one of the leading social media sites? It's TikTok, and TikTok is a China or
That's right.
company and everything. So I mean, and then of course they've got it's been a minute, but I know that I think both parents at some time or another, it might have been the 70s or the 80s, visited China, and they had even at that time a lot of our companies in roaming all throughout there. I can only imagine what kind of Burger Kings and McDonald's are roaming around China right now. So isn't that also part of the problem, is that we put it in the context of communism versus capitalism, but is there truly a 100% communist society out there? I would even argue Cuba isn't 100%.
No, no.
But
And I think going back to what Sasha was talking about with Marx, Karl Marx, when he wrote Das Kapital, basically his deal was this, that there are stages of society, and those stages of society move to the panacea, capitalism, and then socialism, and then communism.
Right.
So that those stages move towards those areas. So when you hit communism, you are totally and completely free. You're free of all the stages, all the different classes, all the different things that have to go along with that. But then if you read Animal Farm, or you read War of the Worlds. War of the Worlds is a very, very good thing to read in today's society, because in the beginning of the War of the Worlds, it says that Mars took a look at the Earth as a green and plush and very beautiful planet that they wanted. Well, think about that. Ukraine, beautiful. People were, prosperous. Everything was going well for them. Russia, I think we'll take that. I think we're going to take that. We're going to invade that. H.G. Wells wasn't referring to Mars as the Martians are going to invade the Earth. He was talking about different countries that feel that their light shines brighter than anybody else. And that's the situation. And they wanted more, and they took more, and they had the technology to do it.
Now,
Okay, I think Steve, just allow me to
please, Sasha, please.
what I said before. By the time that Putin came back, remember the 4 years Medvedev was the president, and then Putin came back because there were uprising of Russian middle class. There were hundreds of thousands of people on the streets. And Putin, when he came back to power, he crashed all these protest movements.
Yeah.
And a lot of these people, they migrated from Russia to Ukraine, and Ukraine was free society where they could publish everything what they wanted to do. They had a right to have meetings and so on. So Ukraine was a great place for them. And they were becoming quite influential in Ukraine society. And Ukrainian, they had talk shows and different publications and so on. And essentially, all the protest which was in at that time when Putin was not 4 years not the president, all the protests and protesters, the main protesters, they all migrated from Russia to Ukraine. So what's happening after that, especially after Crimea, that Russia was becoming more and more like closed, mobilized, ideological society. Ukraine was flourishing as a free society, friendly to the West, wanted to become part of the West, and so on. So that's why, not only to unite the countries to make something of an old Soviet Union, but the idea, ideologically, the question, not only ideologically, there is a danger that if it wouldn't be for war, West would accept Ukraine in European Union, possibly not, and would help them to build a prosperous society. So people in Russia would say, well, what are we doing? Here is Ukraine, prosperous societies that are doing so well, and we are struggling and we don't know where we're going with all that. That's not good. This is exactly why Putin strike now, and now because Ukraine with each month, each year is becoming stronger and stronger. So the time to strike was now.
Now, what about economically sanctions, Sasha? I mean, and Chris and Mark. I mean, do you think that these, regardless of threats of the gas prices going up, or, restricting imports of oil and gas, these things that are going on with Starbucks, McDonald's, Amazon? I heard. I forgot to mention that. Is this going to affect it at all, or is he just made up his mind and he's just going to keep going?
He's going to keep going. Make no doubt. Dead or deposed. That's the only thing that's going to stop this guy. Dead or deposed. There's no other thing. This guy, as long as he takes breath, Ukraine is going to be under siege. I mean,
could there be an undercover effort to take him out, or is that impossible in Russia? We're violating international rules, right? Because he's the head of state. You can't do that, right?
Right. Nope.
It's next to impossible.
Yeah, you can't. The Russian military, the strong, is barricaded.
Let me tell you something.
Like the only time taking out a United States president.
I think Dr. Leon said it. The only time we ever tried to take out a head of state was when we linked Muammar Gaddafi to the terrorist attack that killed individuals in the Berlin in the Berlin disco. At that point, El Dorado Canyon went in to take out his military targets, but they did have at the presidential palace as one of the targets. He just happened to be traveling, of all things. Now it wouldn't have happened because we have cell phone stuff and all that. But at that time we didn't have that, and he happened to be traveling in a car from the presidential palace when it blew up. So he got injured, but only slightly. But that's the only time in the history of the U.S. that we've actually targeted a head of state in any type of bombing run or otherwise. But yeah, it'd be impossible to hit him.
Regrettably, I've spoke yesterday, by the way, to a few people who are watching Russian First Channel. I stopped watching that to preserve my sanity, and they are watching. And you know what? When they're watching Russian channel and told me what they're talking about or so on, and I asked that this is completely different, 100% different from what we're seeing on CNN or Fox News or just almost any other US channel. They say all those channels are lying.
Yeah.
The Russian First Channel, they know the truth, they are telling the truth, and all these US channels are lying.
Yeah, and the Russian press has been completely taken. I mean, there's no press anymore there, right? It's all being controlled by the government. They're shutting down.
But I mean, that's been the case for a while. Because when I think of world leaders, I was actually going to bring this up and everything in terms, because even though I've had conversations with friends and acquaintances of mine about Putin, very few people know anything about, unlike the U.S., where everybody seems to know everything about the president's personal life and what they're doing and all of that. Very little is known about Putin. I mean, we know he's had at least a couple of wives and we know he's got kids, but I mean, they seem to be totally secluded and hidden. As a matter of fact, I was reading one article with a documentary filmmaker where he said that he spent hundreds of hours with Putin reflecting on and creating a movie about Putin and never had one interview, much less any time with any of the family members. So it's very incredible that this man can totally hide from the public, meaning the Russian public, as well as the world, his family. I mean, it's probably a brilliant move, but I don't know how anybody has been able to do it. And apparently he's the first one to be able to do it. So, Sasha, you were in the Russian army. How was it even possible for folks to not get caught up in that kind of situation? And is this common for the Russian generals and everybody to be as secretive as he is, or is it more of a KGB kind of tactic that he learned from his days in the KGB?
There are a lot of mysteries about Putin, starting with his age. No one really knows how old is he. Some people believe that he's going to be 70.
69. 69 is what they say.
69. Some people believe that he is older than that. Some people believe he's younger than that. It's unclear even where he spent his childhood. There is a theory well documented that he spent his childhood in Georgia, and his mother married the Georgian person, had 5 children with him, and Putin was really young. Vladimir Putin was really hated by his stepfather, and he wanted him to get out of there so he wouldn't see him. He was going to school. He was beaten every single day by his classmates, and he was miserable in that respect. Finally, when he finished the school, at that time he was already in St. Petersburg. Supposedly, when he had to leave that family of his mother, he was accepted by his grandparents in St. Petersburg. And there, where he grew up, when he finished his school, he wanted to become a KGB person because that's where he saw the prosperity and a good career and so on. His only problem was that KGB would not accept him. I think for a couple of years he was really hard trying to get there. He couldn't. So finally he was accepted. He was very average student, and finally he got a post in Dresden in at that time East Germany, where he was operative of KGB. His mission was recruit as many East Germans to spy for Soviet Union, but these Germans they were spying anyway. So I'm not even clear what he wanted to get out of this East Germans in Dresden. However, it's evident that he liked to drink beer, playing ping pong, table tennis, and that's where he spent these years until the Gorbachev's perestroika started. So when a Soviet group in Germany, in East Germany, was dismantled, so Putin was dismissed. So he became really the proletarian in the classic sense of the word. Yes, no money, no job, no nothing, just KGB training. Although he was really lousy student, but what happened next? He started to be the right hand of Mr. Sobchak, which at that time was very powerful mayor of St. Petersburg, and he was involved in financial transactions where he netted millions, if not billions of dollars right there. And for that point on, because his prowess to do all the financial operations, basically there were no operations, there was just pure stealing. They would arrange, for example, exchange of Russian goods for Western food products. So they would acquire the food products at different prices and they resold them and made profit there on rare metals as well and so on. And there were people who knew all the track of his transactions, and he was isolating them. One woman was hiding in Siberia in forests with all the documentation about Putin's deeds, and but she passed away in I think around 2011, Miss Salve. And so he got away with all that, was transferred into once Sobchak lost his election in 1996. He moved to, he had some few St. Petersburg friends who help him to settle in Moscow. And then he started to climb to, first of all, head of FSB. It's beyond even Lucrece. You're like a former military man. How you see this little operative in Dresden, then crook in Sobchak's government, all of a sudden would become the head of FSB.
Oh, he used leverage. He had leverage on people. I mean, that's how the KGB does it. They use leverage on people, and then they apply that leverage. So he knew something about these other people, like mistresses, corruption, offshore accounts. Something was happening, and he just made his plays based on that. Because, as you say, he didn't have skill, he didn't have education, he didn't have, he did all he did was he had this KGB training. So he did all kind of neat things, spy stuff to be able to
Chris,
get where he's going.
speaking of
Chris,
that,
I disagree with you, really. I'll tell you why.
Sure.
Because when he was operating in Sobchak's government in the early 1990s, early 1990s in St. Petersburg, his KGB skills were no longer required. I'm not saying that he lost them, no, not at all. But it was he was making so much money that it was way out of the way of his daily operations. He just, there was no use for it, simply because Putin is very pragmatic man. If something he does makes money, good, he's gonna apply to it and to make even more.
Yep.
Now, if that doesn't really make money, he wouldn't even turn his attention to it. So by the time that Sobchak lost election, so Putin was on the street. And his friends, remember I was talking about St. Petersburg group. So one of the members, well-known members of the St. Petersburg group, helped Putin to move to Moscow and settle there. So he became some kind of a small-time operative. At least he gets some salary there in Moscow. But he was elevated to head of FSB with this very substantial position. Why he was elected? I believe the reason is that at that time already, Yeltsin was looking for somebody to take over from him. And he believes that Putin, with his KGB background, will be a better choice to provide Yeltsin
Is
with...
Boris Yeltsin alive?
No.
I think Boris Yeltsin died of heart ailments.
Yeah, he was drinking a lot.
And how about Mikhail Gorbachev? Is Mikhail Gorbachev alive, and where does he live?
He is. He's 91. He is. He's criticizing this Russia.
Where does he live? Russia?
Moscow, yeah.
Wow.
But he travels a lot, and he still gives lectures and performances and appearances of all kinds.
Is his wife still alive? Is his wife still alive?
Probably no. His wife passed away a long time ago, in the early 90s. That was.
Hey, Chris and Sasha, just really quickly, how much of because that's the other thing I've been wondering about, and actually Mr. Liana alluded to it to some degree, but how much of this press misdirect is actually going to be effective, not so much with us, but with the other countries when he tries to paint it as, and yes, I do know that Zelensky is Jewish, but when he tries to paint it as if this is a war against another form of government that we don't like, meaning the world, meaning the whole neo-Nazi argument and everything. I know that it doesn't work in the U.S. because we're seeing it not work here, but how much is it actually going to work in, say, the African nations, the Asian nations, and even some of the European nations? I was just wondering, because there had been even things about some of the corruption of the Ukraine before the war and everything, but I was just wondering, is this argument going to fly at all with the rest of the nations?
Well, you mean the NPR had a story on, like I told you before the show, about the EU, and the reason the EU did not accept Ukraine is because in the corruption index they were way high. So they said, no, we can't accept that. You got to bring your corruption down. So the corruption individual from the EU that was in Ukraine before the war, before the invasion, said, look, they're making headway, but they still have a high corruption index. So they're making headway towards that, bringing it down so they can get acceptance into the EU. And then the invasion happened. So but the misdirect, when you talk about misdirect and different things, you can talk about things like, if I were Putin, which I thank you God I'm not, but if I were him, I would have pointed out something like, hey, America, look at what's happening. Remember that Russian, intervention in your voting stuff? That wasn't Russia. That was Ukraine. That was Ukraine using Russian IP addresses. And basically, Ukraine is the one that did that and blamed it on us. By us invading Ukraine, we're going to stop all this voting intervention, and we're going to stop this, and we're going to put this back right with the United States, because we can prove, using media, we can prove that those IP addresses that they used were actually Ukrainian. And Ukrainians have a rich history of cybersecurity, of cyber hacking. So, I mean, a lot of things they could have gone to those misdirects with that. But the media now is interesting because they're trying to be very fair. They're trying to present all sides, and this, getting back to ex-President Trump. And I understand he's the ex-president, but this guy can never get out of the spotlight. He's got to say something about something, or else he's not happy. And even stating that, you sit back and you go, yeah, we're going to put Chinese stars on jets that we got from wherever, and we're going to fly them into Ukraine and kill Russians, because then the Russians will naturally think that the Chinese are doing that. I mean, the Russians would sit there and say, Chinese aren't doing that. They're not involved. So, I mean, it's stuff like that I get it. Thank you for being creative, Mr. Ex-President. But if you just do what you do best, whatever that may be, real estate or whatever it is, just go do that and get yourself out of the limelight for now. But he just never does. And that's that part of that media. They got to pick that up. And then they fling that all over the place like horse poop in a fan, and it's just really hard for me sometimes to take it, because I'm an intelligence guy. So I sit back and I go, no, we're not going to do that. It's great for a novel, but it's not good for real life.
But it's good for likes, a lot of likes, posts.
Yes. I agree with you, Sasha. I agree with you.
That's it's all about.
Yeah, you're right. Immediate gratification. But yeah.
I also getting information there is really growing protest against Putin's actions. And it's not just people going on the streets where thousands and tens of thousands of people are arrested and thrown to jails, but there's a lot of turmoil even in social media, whatever is left there, because they closed all the Facebook, YouTube, or so on. The country is going back 50 years at least. Even I think the only one company, the US company is still operating, believe it or not, in Russia is Pepsi. Why? They were there 60 years ago. They're selling some products for children, some kid stuff, that stuff. But it's becoming really incredible. And I think Putin is very isolated. He's getting information from the sources, yes, men who are telling him only what he wants to listen. And he's getting scared. There's information that his favorite movie these days is The Last Days of Gaddafi.
Yes, I mean, exactly. And all of this is making me want to pull some hunt for October and get some. I've been drinking Belvedere vodka because Smirnoff gives me a headache and I can't find Beluga anywhere. Although one day I will have that. Sasha, if I ever meet you, I want to have some Russian vodka. But I feel like pulling the old.
Believe it or not, I still have a bottle of Beluga.
Okay, then I'm coming to meet you sometime.
He's coming to get that bottle, he says. He's coming to get that for sure and everything.
Some potatoes, guys. Potatoes and, fermentation. There you go.
Hey, Chris, you'll get a kick out of this. When I was talking to that friend of mine that was a manager, he was telling me about the how quickly, when we were in another conflict, they actually decided to quit. I think that he said it was Afghanistan, if I remember correctly, and everything. But he said that part of the reason that they decided to quit so fast, it was during the Reagan era. So yeah, it was during the Reagan era. So it couldn't have been Afghanistan. But he was saying that the reason that they quit so fast was because they had seen Reagan's old military movies. So they were actually kind of like going there and afraid that he would act the way that he did in those old military movies and all of that. So I'm thinking about that. It might have been Lebanon that he was referring to. But I was just wondering if you had ever heard that story.
No, there you go.
Beluga, there we go.
We're going to get ready for closeout. I'm going to go ahead and start my closeout mark, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, just really quickly. I'm just going to mention two other quick things very quickly. I did see that, and this is other world news and everything, that the North Carolina and Pennsylvania districts will not be overturned. The U.S. Supreme Court decided that they were not going to hear those cases. So whatever districts we have in those two states, they will stay as they are now, because the U.S. Supreme Court said that they are not going
But
to
they could change
review
it.
those cases and everything. So we can talk about that
But they could
tomorrow.
change,
And
they
as
could
I had
change
told
it.
Chris very quickly, and then I'm going to turn it over to you for the closeout, I have been part of a 24-hour, and that's actually what Nick heard me listening to as we were starting the show, Leukemia and Lymphoma Society fundraiser. So it's a thing that one of our allies here on the network, Tim Sohn, is going for Man of the Year up there in Pennsylvania. So he's got streamers from around the country that are trying to raise something like 50,000 in that particular part of the contest, even though I know that they're raising hundreds of thousands, if not millions, as they're doing these throughout the country and probably even throughout the world. As a matter of fact, I know he's got some world people that were involved. So I'm actually going to be doing a segment at 2:00 tied with that. So I had told Chris that I did not want to allude to the wrong thing, because I was not sure whether it was cancer or heart disease. But, anytime we get these efforts to help people in fundraising efforts, particularly even as Mr. Biden was talking about the need for cancer research and definitely research in other things that are going on, I am always glad to try to participate in these efforts, and definitely want to just give a shout out to that. And you can find out more of it on LinkedIn under either my page or under Tim Sohn. So definitely just wanted to share that going on, and it'll end at 6 this evening. We started at 6 yesterday.
Well, it's getting ready for closeout. I'm going to go ahead and begin my closeout today. Thank you all for being on World Edition. And as I said yesterday, I want to close out with some remarks I made at our invocation last evening at our city council meeting. In 1963, at American University, June 1963, President John F. Kennedy was addressing the issue of world peace. And he asked the question, what kind of peace do I mean? What kind of peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana enforced in the world by American weapons of war, not the peace of the grave or the security of the slave. I am talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and to build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, but peace for all time. And as we end with those quotes from the late President John F. Kennedy, we look at the world today in the year 2022, and we certainly pray for peace. Peace now and peace forever, but most importantly for the people of Ukraine. If there's anything we can learn from this crisis, it's that freedom is worth not only fighting for, but dying for. And it's the price that the 40 million citizens of this great nascent democracy, Ukraine, are willing to pay to have their freedom, to have their democracy. This is a lesson to all of us, no matter what nation we are in, that we must always remember the price that has been paid for that freedom. The fallen soldiers and the greatest generation that came together in World War II, that fought for every free nation in the world. The brave American soldiers and troops from around the world who defend our freedom every day. Chris Greco is one of our panelists, a retired Air Force lieutenant colonel. My in-laws served in the United States Air Force, and many veterans who watch and listen to this show. At the end of the day, that's what this is about. It's about freedom. It's about democracy. It's about hope. It's about doing the right thing. Our hats are off to the people of Ukraine. President Zelensky, we support you in your efforts to fight in the forests, in the streets, on the beaches, as you address the parliament, likening your speech to Winston Churchill. There's a lot at stake here, but I wanted to end with those serious remarks as we end this program. Wherever you are, from our family to yours, please pray for the democracy of Ukraine. Their very lives and their very future depend on it, but also the future of the world as we know it. God bless each of you. We'll be back tomorrow for another edition where we'll talk a little bit more about domestic issues as well as the Supreme Court decision on the districts in North Carolina and the other states and other issues. See you tomorrow.